This game has been out for over 4 years, if you count the beta and alpha testing periods. And still, to this day, we see things that have plagued the game time and time again. I mean, let's take lemming trains. Seriously, if this tactic hasn't worked the last 100 times, what makes you think it's magically going to work this time? I mean, it's really hard to think that out of 11 players on your team, not one, aside from yourself, is stopping to say, hey, wait a second, this doesn't feel right. I mean, seriously, the name lemming train should be a hint right there. Lemmings. Lemmings run off the edge of a hill and they die. And then it becomes some twisted version of the telephone game. But by the time the phrase gets from the first ship in the train to the last, it's not Purple Monkey Dishwasher, it's, hey, I've been sunk, followed by incessant complaining of no support and everything else. You know how it goes. And you know not to follow the train, but you do it anyways because who wants to go off by themselves and sink with no support whatsoever? And this just adds to the total train wreck, and everybody winds up upset because ultimately your team winds up getting stomped. And then we've got the lemming train's cousin, the pinwheel. Nothing like seeing both teams send all of their players in a clockwise or counterclockwise motion around the map. This is almost worse than the lemming train because instead of 11 players, it's 23 other players all being herded around the map by an invisible sheepdog. Again, what can you do? I mean, can you imagine Halsey sitting around thinking of pinwheeling as a tactic? Hey, we're not going to assault the island, we're not going to bombard the island, let's just go around the island in a circle and see what the Japanese do in retaliation. Doesn't make sense, does it? So why do we do it in warships? Ultimately, one team gets stomped hard, and then the bitching takes to the forums and Facebook in a variety of ways. The telltale signs on Facebook are a vibrant background or pink or similar color with giant block letters declaring, my team sucks, I'm 0-10, yada yada yada. While part of me wants to say, hey buddy, what's the constant factor in those 10 games? Another part of me has a lot of empathy. Primarily because I, like most veteran players, see the things I just described. Over and over and over. It's like that tier 8 and above player that goes into the battle naked with no camouflage. But not by accident. You just have to laugh and not act surprised at this point. However, we spend so much time, myself included, complaining about what we think the meta should be, we neglect that this is indeed what the meta is. Sure, we want swashbuckling rounds where all the ships push and a giant and fun brawl erupts in the middle of the cap. And this happens occasionally. It's not the norm though. The norm is what I just described. Pinwheeling, lemming training, sniping from range, anticlimactic combat where the team that dares wins. A lot of times it's just plain boring. You know this. A lot of players right now are complaining about CVs and their effect on the game. They've made players passive, unwilling to move. Where have you been the past 4 years and what naval game have you been playing? I want to know so I can play it. Carriers have changed nothing in the play. Well, let me take that back. The effects on destroyers have in fact been real. But every other ship? It's no different than it was before. And honestly, the old carriers had a much worse effect on the game. It's just that you only noticed it 1 in every 1,000 rounds. Well, maybe it's more like 10 rounds. The fact that CVs are much more prevalent now has magnified all of these issues. So we've got all of these perceived issues, which are really just how the game has always predominantly been played. We complain because it's not how we want it to be played, and nothing is getting fixed, and I don't know if it ever will. So what do we do? What to do? Where do we go from here? It does suck getting stomped in any round. And yes, sometimes it does feel like matchmaking legit stacks one team and not the other. Whether this is actually a thing, or is perceived, who knows? I know plenty of us have our tinfoil hats on regarding this. But going to any forum to complain about the myriad of issues is pointless. We've seen it all by now. Your complaint has already been used by 1,000 players over. And I get it, what happened does indeed suck. But you have a choice. You can vent where it's not going to make a difference. Some people will give a laughing emoji, some an angry emoji, or whatever. In the end, nothing changes. You might feel better for a few minutes before playing again, and then it just happens all over again. Or we can try to adapt and overcome. If the team lemming trains or pinwheels, point it out. Ask players to go the other way with you. Take command of the team. Direct them. Be that sheepdog. Yeah, it's possible players will ignore you, but it's also possible players won't ignore you, and some may follow you. And if the majority doesn't, and you're sunk, that just means you get to go back to port and start a new round while the rest of your team gets demolished. If they do listen, you have a better chance of winning, and the satisfaction that you made a difference. If players aren't pushing, be the player that does. Same concept as above. And it all comes down to how will you have the most fun. That is the big driving factor. This should be the main factor in the game. Yeah, winning is fun. That's the entire purpose of this game. But what do you do when you know that's not going to happen? Do you sit in the rear and run out the full time of the round trying to stay alive and awake as your team slowly gets picked off, watching that slow-moving train wreck? Or do you charge in, have a brief minute of fun brawling before you're ultimately sunk? Again, I don't think there's a wrong answer. It just comes down to what makes it more enjoyable for you. If things aren't enjoyable and you find yourself having to complain how unenjoyable they are, find a way to make it enjoyable or take a break. Find a new class, a new playstyle that brings back the fun. If you're pissed because CVs are wrecking your experience as a Unicum Destroyer player, play cruisers and shoot down planes. Play carriers and wreak havoc on destroyers. Play a battleship and just ignore everything altogether. You have options. Or put out a post and find some division mates. That's the best and easiest way to influence a round, or at the very least have fun. The bottom line is that life is too short to let a game ruin your day, a week, or even a month. There's no set way to play World of Warships. How you play it is how the game is played. Whether it's the sniping from the rear in a battleship that many of us lament, or charging in on cap as a destroyer. The meta is the meta. Adapt and overcome. Anyhow, guys, get out there, have some fun. Hope you're having a great week, and I will see you all later. Zoop out.